We're going to take a look at the middle school poetry units. These are some of my very favorites. We get to work with interesting poems from interesting poets. We have some opportunities to reflect on craft and on interpretation, and we get to try our own hand at crafting some of our own poems in the Write-Like exercises. There's a little bit of different work happening at each grade level, but we should be able to talk about some of the main structures and purposes of this work and provide some time for you to review the resources and think through some of your key planning decisions. In 6th grade, the unit is How Poems Are Built, and the work moves between three poets, Ko Un, Rita Dove, and William Carlos Williams. Students get to examine in particular how each of these poets uses imagery and line breaks, among other devices, to craft compact, intriguing pieces. They craft a poem in the style of Ko Un, draft an interpretation of Rita Dove's Sunday Night at Grandfather's, and after studying Williams as well, write a retrospective paper in which they consider what they have learned about how poems are built from this work. In 7th grade, we're looking at creating characters in poetry, where students study Martina Spada and Nikki Giovanni. There's so much going on in the poems of these outstanding poets, so students will have opportunities to work through comprehension exercises, to unpack a variety of poetic devices, to consider some of the arguments being made by each poet, and to consider the ways in which each poet crafts deliberate portraits of characters in their poems. 8th grade's unit presents the work of Emily Dickinson and Kay Ryan, and along with continued work through comprehension and the analysis of poetic devices, students begin to consider how multiple selections from a single poet can give readers clues about what matters to that writer, about how that writer seems to view the world around them. As with almost all of our text selections at IBD, the poems in these units do not necessarily present easy answers or straightforward solutions. When you read through them in advance, sit with the poems and enjoy them, but don't feel the need to arrive at your own settled final conclusion of how to interpret them. It's okay to have uncertainties of your own as you enter this work. Conversations will always spark new ideas, and students will make connections that we might not have anticipated. If you're beginning your initial planning for this unit, this is a good time to open up your own grade-level teacher manual and the student reader, and to take a look at some of the important planning features. In particular, you'll want to take a look at the introduction to the unit, as well as the at-a-glance section, where you can see how sessions are organized, and of course the major tasks in the unit, which you can find in the sessions themselves or in the appendix of the unit. With these things in mind, give yourself the time to take a slow, thoughtful read of the poems. This might be a 20 to 30 minute review of everything, and the idea here is just to get a sense of the structure and the intended flow of the work, not to settle every lingering question about it. If you're planning with peers, hold on to some of those questions for the more detailed review afterward. Once you've had the chance to take a look at the poems and the general structure of the unit, there are a couple more things you can do to help prepare for this unit in advance. One is, quite simply, to sit down and talk about some of these poems with your peers. In a traditional professional learning session, we would be able to do this all together in an as-learner experience. However, if you're able to set aside instructional concerns for a moment and just ponder the poems aloud with a colleague through the lens of some of the interpretive questions, it should help you feel a little more grounded in the work that you will be doing with them. After having spent some time with the poems, you should look more closely at each of the tasks students are expected to do with them. How do the tasks build on one another? How does a conversation about poetic devices, for example, lead into a broader conversation about how to interpret the poems? Which tasks are formal writing tasks? And which ones lead into discussions or quick writes or notes? In particular, consider the writing types that students are asked to produce. Poetry, at least as an official task, will be a new exercise here. But the intention there is to keep stakes fairly low. The Write-Like work should feel fresh and fun, and if it clicks with your students, feel free to add in more of it than is specifically assigned. At this point in the year, students should have had several earlier experiences writing interpretive arguments and informational explanatory papers, whichever your unit may require. So what you want to consider here is how students can grow in these areas, based on what you've observed. Certainly, there are opportunities here to challenge students in their interpretive discussions, or to have them set goals for themselves. And when it comes to the writing, you might want to take a look at Inquiry by Design's form guide, or at the targeted writing lessons, to start generating ideas of how to continue coaching students in their academic writing. Don't forget the use of modeling and exemplars discussed in Section 1 of each writing type in the form guide. And take a look at the structures for self-reflection and peer review provided in Section 3 of the same guide. If you're working with colleagues to plan ahead for this unit, this is a good time to start considering some of these particulars. Working with grade level partners will be the most helpful thing, but having some vertical conversations is a good idea too, so you can think about how your expectations align and how students can extend their work into increasingly thoughtful and challenging work as they get older. So once again, here are my recommendations for next steps. Make use of any opportunity here to talk about some of these poems with your colleagues. Chances are each text will strike each person a little differently, and we all gain from each other's insight. As we often say, we believe people get smarter together. Take a close look at the tasks of the unit, considering which ones are formal or summative, and which ones are intended to help students build their thinking and their ideas along the way. Lastly, make some notes about how you hope to see students strengthen their academic conversations and writing in this unit. Which additional IBD resources might you want to draw on to support this? That might include the form guide or the targeted writing lessons, or even some of the reflection tools found in the portfolio section of the correctness guide. Having an opportunity to meet together and to work through these units in an as-learner experience is always going to give us the strongest understanding of how these units play out. And frankly, it's more fun. But this introduction should help paint some of the broad strokes of the work, and ideally, you'll be able to use some of these questions to think through the unit in advance and to spend some time in conversation with your peers. As I said at the beginning, these poetry units are some of my favorites. They bring in powerful texts from a wide range of voices, and with some thoughtful work in the classroom, we can create an environment where students feel comfortable wrestling with the challenges of these poems.